skyrocketing. But just imagine going from a quarter to 79 cents. That's insane. So that's some of the things that were happening in the United States during the 1970s. The OPEC countries, mostly countries in the Middle East, they were actually mad at the United States because we supported Israel. And so they are the ones who are going to raise the oil prices, and these oil prices are going to stay raised during the 1970s. To try to battle stagflation, Nixon raised taxes, which seems odd to me, and he also cut budget. This did not work. Stagflation continues to rise in the 1970s. Foreign policy rise. We've talked about his domestic policy. His foreign policy is very, very important that you know the name of these two things. The first thing is called realpolitik. If you guys remember, we have been talking about containment in class since we talked about the end of World War II. And that was our policy that all our presidents had. Those are the things that led us into Korea, that led us into Vietnam. Realpolitik is a foreign policy that shies away from this brinkmanship, from this containment that we had been doing for 20, 30 years. Realpolitik pretty much said that we really don't care if you're communist. We actually care if you actually have power. So we don't care if Vietnam becomes communist. Vietnam has no power. We need to look at countries that have power, like China, like the Soviet Union. So if a country is weak, we ignore it. If a country is strong, we try to make that country a little bit more of our friend. To go along with realpolitik, the foreign policy of Nixon was détente. Détente was aimed at easing Cold War tensions. Nixon became the first sitting United States president to actually visit China since it had become communist after World War II. And he's also the first sitting president that visits the Soviet Union after it had become communist after World War I. What you probably know most about Nixon, however, is Watergate. Watergate, as just discussed earlier on in these notes, Watergate was a hotel, and the Democrats had their headquarters to re-elect to try to elect their new candidate in the Watergate Hotel. Nixon actually knows about this scandal. They go in, they wiretap the Democratic Convention's phones, try to figure out some of their strategies to try to get their person elected, and they found out about it. The FBI found out that he had wiretapped his phones, and they got in trouble for it. The people who actually did or knew mostly about the wiretapping were his advisors, H.R. Haldeman, John Oakerman, John Mitchell, and John Dean. They were known as the President's Men. These are those guys who knew about the wiretapping, and these are some of the political cartoons that we see from the Watergate scandal. So, Nixon, he says, I didn't do anything. The FBI, the CIA, everyone is trying to look into this investigation. Nixon is saying, I did nothing. Nixon actually goes on television and he tells Americans, I am not a crook. And he was a crook. He's trying to cover this up, but Nixon kind of forgets that just like Johnson, as I told you guys before, every president gets a presidential library after they are no longer president. And many people thought that it would be a good idea that when Americans came to their library, that they would be able to hear the president making policy decisions. Okay. Ms. Horton's coming through. Just say hi. Okay. So, they thought that it would be really cool to hear the president's, when he's making policy in these libraries. Well, Nixon forgot to press pause on these tapes when he was doing bad things. When he was saying, yeah, I knew about the burglary, yeah, we're covering it up. He forgot to press pause. And so, in U.S. versus Nixon, the Supreme Court ordered for the president to turn over all of the tapes that he had recorded. He refused to turn over those tapes at first. Then the Supreme Court says you have to. He turns over some of the tapes, but he edited them. And there were big gaps in these tapes. And the House actually votes to impeach Nixon. During this time period, Nixon's going through all this stuff. And his vice president, Spiro Agnew, is actually in trouble too. He's not in trouble for the Watergate scandal. He's in trouble for some shady land dealings. And so before he gets in trouble too much, he decides to resign from office. And he quits. And so Nixon has to appoint someone to become vice president. He does get that power in the 25th Amendment. So he appoints Gerald Ford, who is the minority leader of the House, to become his new vice president. A few months later, he releases his tapes, as I said, but they were edited. Even with the unedited tapes, the House does vote. The House committee votes to impeach Nixon and send that all of this stuff that they have against Nixon. They send it to the full House so that the full House can debate whether or not to formally impeach the president. On the 5th of August, he released tapes again. However, they are still edited. There's an 18 gap. It's just 18 minutes of nothing. So you're listening to the tapes, he's talking, and then there's just silence for 18 minutes. After just hearing these tapes, the full House was about to vote on the impeachment of the president, but before the full House voted, Nixon resigns. So again, every time in class, I ask all of my students, who are the only two presidents in the United States to be impeached? You always say Nixon. Nixon was not impeached. Nixon resigned before he was impeached. He would have been impeached, but he resigns. The two presidents who were impeached were who? See, you were at home, you're shouting Johnson and Clinton. Good job. Okay? Watergate, along with Vietnam and the Pentagon Papers, which we talked about last chapter, they delusioned Americans. Even to this day, we always think the worst of our politicians. We think that they're lying, even if they might not be. And it's because of Watergate. And that's it. We will actually talk about Ford and Carter in class. Nixon, we will not talk about in class. So please make sure that you look at these notes, that you are ready for these notes, because I am not teaching this in class. All right, guys. Have a good one.